This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Jordan Crane. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, one of the two guys with PhDs talking about comics. And on this interview episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Jordan Crane. Issue number 5 of his series Uptight came out earlier this year from Fantagraphics. But before we get into that conversation, I want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials you'll find at 45% off the cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that are more impressive than that. And this month, you can find some great deals on the kind of comics that we'd like to discuss on the Comics Alternative. For example, there's the first issue of Jeff Lemire and Dean Ormston's Black Hammer at 50% off of the cover price. You can also find, for that same discount, Brian Lee O'Malley and Leslie Hung's Snot Girl, number 1. Then there's the 13th volume of Fables Deluxe Edition at 50% off of the cover price. And don't forget the bundle deals they have from such publishers as Vertigo and Aftershock. So there are a lot of great bundles there at Discount Comic Book Service. You gotta go to the website and see what other specials they have for the month of May. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. I had a really fun conversation with Jordan Crane. We spent a lot of time talking about his most recent issue of Uptight, issue number 5, that came out in February of this year. And this is a series that's been going on for quite a while, 10 years in fact. Issue number 1 of Uptight was released in May of 2006. So we talked a lot about that series, but we also spoke about some of his other works as well. For instance, his very first book, The Last Lonely Saturday, it was originally released in 2000. It was republished by Fantagraphics in 2006. Jordan's also the author of Cold D, which was published in 2001, The Clouds Above in 2005, and more recently from McSweeney's, Keep Our Secrets, that was released in 2012. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. I'm pleased to have on the podcast Jordan Crane. The latest issue of his series Uptight, number 5, came out in February of this year. Jordan, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
Thanks very much.
You know, I want to get started on your series Uptight and this latest issue, if for no other reason because it strikes me that in more ways than one, this is a significantly different issue than the previous 4. In one way it's different is this is a much heftier issue.
Yes, it's bigger. Well, it had been a while since one came out, so I felt it was sort of, my duty to make it large.
I was going to ask about that, because I think number 4 came out in late 2012.
Something like that, so long ago.
Yeah, but I didn't even think that maybe you were making up for it being a few years. I thought that maybe this was a new format that you adopted, that maybe Uptight from here on in will be longer.
Well, I would like that. I do really like the format. I had had this catalog paper that I really wanted to print on, and I love how thin it is, and I love how black the ink looks on it. And it felt really, something I really wanted to do. And And it lends itself to a bigger issue. You know, I like how deceptively small the issue kind of seems when you pick it up. It's not super thick, but like it's 112 pages, so that's nice. And I really like the feel of the paper. And yeah, you know, like it was really great to be able to do a couple of longer stories, you know, because the previous issues, typically, you know, a story would be 10 to 15 pages. And this one, two of the stories were about 27 pages. And then I had a longer section of Keeping Two, which is an ongoing story, which I'm wrapping up this year, ... hopefully. Working on wrapping that up. That's sort of on my drawing table right now is what I'm working on. And then, you know, a couple of short stories as well, or one short story, which is, I think, just 6 pages. But it was really nice to be able to kind of stretch out. You know, both of those 26-page stories kind of started as shorter stories. And I was able to expand them out from there. And that, you know, having that room was really nice. I'd really like to continue doing the bigger issues. I have a couple of, you know, things that I'm working on right now that lend themselves again to the sort of longer story format. And so, yeah, it's exciting. I do like the big issues. I do hope it's. I would like to keep doing them for sure. Hopefully without the long delay in between. The funny thing is, I've been working this whole time. It's just I haven't put out an issue. It's mainly been on Keeping Two, but you know, I don't know.
Well, another reason why I was asking about the thickness of issue number 5 is I know now this is, I don't know if I mentioned it, but you know, for our listeners, this is published through Fantagraphics, and you know, it's gotten to the point that Fantagraphics really doesn't do much of anything anymore with single issues, let's say comic book format. There are a few exceptions. You know, I guess most recently, Hip Hop Family Tree is not only a single issue comic book, but it's a monthly now, which is really amazing. And what used to be individual comics have now become book forms or annuals. Now, you know, Love and Rockets has become an annual. It's going back to single issue form, so that's good. Now, I was wondering if Uptight was making that migration from smaller comic book size to longer format as part of maybe some larger initiative that Fantagraphics has going on, or if it's something that they suggested. But again, you're saying that it was that you wanted more space, you wanted to make up for lost time.
Exactly, yeah. And Fantagraphics, the great part about Fantagraphics is they totally just take the artist's lead, you know, like none of this is like propelled by them. Even they let me put out the single issues. It's amazing. They've never pressured me to be like, dude, maybe you should kind of make a book. Never. And that's really nice. I think it's amazing. And being able to put out the comic books is it's great. I love being able to work in that format. You know, it's something that I just really like. I don't you know, I feel like I can do that and also have, you know, a book come out later, and as long as they're willing to print it, I really want to keep doing comic books. You know, I love comic books. They're great. You know, you can roll them up and jam them in a backpack. They're just a really nice low kind of there's it's very very usable. I just like how, you know, portable and it's I just love the way it. I like it very much.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, and it's, you know, sometimes not the easiest thing to get this information across via an audio podcast, but I'm holding the latest issue of Uptight in my hand. I mean, it still looks like a comic book to me, but it looks more akin to, let's say, the old 80-page giant or 100-page super spectacular, that the kind of comics, you know, where we were growing up. Right, it has that kind of thickness.
And it has a little square bind on it,
right?
You know, so that keeps it. It's definitely, but it's got this really great thin. The paper is so thin that but it's thin, but it's opaque, you know, so it doesn't bleed, and so it ends up rolling really nice. Like, I swear I've
Yeah.
given them to a bunch of friends, just brand new. I find, like, here's this nice comic book, brand new. I'm giving it to you. Here, I did it. And like, as we're talking and they're going, oh, cool, thanks, they roll it up. It's hilarious. And I'm like, dude, you're rolling. I never comment, but I noticed that, wow, you just rolled up that book I gave you. It's kind of cool that it's so, like, it's something tactile about the this particular paper combination that just people roll it up. So it's nice, yeah.
Yeah, it's like rolling up a magazine. And in fact, when I got my copy of Uptight #5 through the mail, it was bent because of that. And I had to return it. Yeah, it was strange. I had to return it for a new copy because the spine, the package had bent in such a way that the spine was broken.
Oh man. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but it is very different in that it's thicker. That you have more page count than the previous issues. And one of the things that I noticed, and maybe I'm off base here, this struck me as, how do I put this? I get maybe with all the stories a much more somber issue. Now, some of your stories in the previous issues of Uptight, have their own kind of somberness, can be kind of downer. For instance, below The Shade of Night, which was in Uptight #1, and then that 2-part stories that was in 3 and 4, Vicissitude and then Unraveling. But you have, following this next installment of Keeping 2, which I want to get to in a moment because I think that's probably the most ambitious installment we've seen so far. But there's Wake Up, which is a short bit.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, but then there's The Dark Nothing, which is even more, it hits you on the head even harder than Wake Up. And then The Middle Nowhere, and it has the potential to be quite dark, but I don't think it ends that way. But it's that middle part, those two stories, Wake Up and The Dark Nothing. I mean, did you feel that the tone in issue #5 was noticeably darker for you?
It's funny. It's not even something I think about when I'm in the middle of the story. I'm just working on the story. When I finished and I sort of started putting them all together, I was definitely stricken by, it's like, wow, this is, this is, what are the people, like, I have friends that aren't comics people that, I'll just give my comics to, be like, what are you working on here, man? And, like, it gave me a little pause, like, what are these people going to think of me? Like, like here, person I know through my, like my kids have friends and, I go over to their friends for, like barbecues or whatever. I'm a cartoonist. I bring my work. Here you go. Here's what I finished lately. What are these people going to think of me? Like, this is awful. These stories are just terrible. All these awful things happening to people. They're just going to think I'm just this. I don't know. It's really not something that I only think about when I reflect on it, and I guess I don't really try to do that too much. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to make these terrible, awful stories.
Well, they're not terrible and awful, but they're dark.
Just such these things are happening that I don't know. It definitely did strike me as a very as a pretty rough issue. But I guess that's just how it works out. Yeah. I don't know what else to I don't know what else to say. I don't know. Yeah. It was definitely a pretty grim issue.
Intense.
Intense is another good word for it. Yeah.
Now, because I was going back and looking at the previous issues before we began talking, and I was noticing in issues 3 and 4. Now, each of those begin with the 2-part, the vicissitude and unraveling, 2 parts of the same story. That is, kind of a somber story, deals with the relationship that seems to be going in a particular downward direction. We don't know that for sure, so that's no spoiler. But in each of those issues, 3 and 4, you ended with a Simon and Jack story, Freeze Out,
Yeah.
and then the follow-up Dark Day. And anytime you're dealing with Simon and Jack, it's going to be fun, right? I mean,
Yeah. So that takes a little bit of the
talking
sting
cat,
off.
right?
Yeah.
So it has to be fun. So that you're right, that does take the sting out of those. But you didn't really have anything to juxtapose, kind of lighter, in issue number 5. And again, I had no problem with that, but it was noticeable that made it a very different issue than the previous Uptights.
Yeah, but it totally did. But I kind of the stories just kind of worked out to be that way. I felt like the Middle Nowhere ended on a sort of upswing from, I thought that was probably the happiest ending I've done in 5 or 10 years maybe, and I liked that direction. And to be honest, I mean, so I have to say I am a little bit conscious of the the grimness of the endings of some of my work. I don't know if that is because I'm ending it at a point in at a point where it's particularly bad for the characters. Mm-hmm. Some of these stories I definitely see in my mind as bigger than the part that I've captured on the page, bigger than the sort of part that I've drawn. And so in my head they kind of keep going. But there's always there's a point where it's kind of makes a good place to end it. Like let's end it here. Like I'm not going to end it after here where there's something else that sort of a new development happens or something. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they're just a good place to end it, and it kind of makes sense with the beginning, and kind of makes a complete sort of a complete phrase,
right?
If, to look at it that way. And so that might be part of it, just if I could draw more, there would be more, which I can, and I possibly will, but like, given time and space, it's that this is as much as I was able to do at this point. So, it was a good place to end it. So that's part of it.
And you mentioned, talking about the Middle Nowhere. I mean, one of the things that's cool about that story is you're dealing with, I guess you can call her a mermaid octopus kind of creature.
Something like that.
Yeah. So that's really cool. But leads me to another thing that I found very different about this latest issue of Uptight. In those last 2 stories, The Dark Nothing and The Middle Nowhere, you're dealing with certain genres that I usually don't associate with your writing. And not only in Uptight, but your other books as well, like The Last One with Saturday, Cold D, Clouds Above. I mean, with your Simon and Jack stories, and those can get fantastical, but I think by their very nature, it makes sense. But other than that, I usually think of you as someone writing about real life experiences, the believable, the mundane world, and in a very insightful way. But in issue number 5 of Uptight, The Dark Nothing is about spaceflight, so it's a sci-fi narrative in many ways. And then The Middle Nowhere, I already mentioned that it deals with a mermaid octopus type of creature, which is a little unusual. And so I'm wondering if you felt that in this latest issue or your more recent stories, you wanted to do something different.
Well, I mean, yes, I guess not so much with the genre so much as like, I feel like both of those stories were moving. Well, so I've always really liked space. That's something that I just have always wanted to. That was like the very first comics, literally the very first comics I ever read were space comics. It was Tom Corbett, Space Cadet. That was like literally the first comic I ever read. And so it's always kind of pulled on me. I've always had this sort of inclination. I've never really seen how to do it, but space is something that has always fascinated me. I read a ton about it, and it seemed pretty natural when I thought of it. I was like, well, Jesus, why don't I just do a space story? And it ended up being a lot harder than I expected it. I mean, that story took me like 2 years, and I ended up, and it just seems ridiculous to say that, but like I drew the whole thing first and ended up chucking it, like the whole thing that I drew, because it didn't feel right. It just didn't work. It was too explainy. There was too much world building going on, which I really love. That's one of the fun things for me about doing a space comic, is you have to figure out how everything works, and that is something that I've always loved doing too, is just being like, well, this works with that and that works with this, and just building the ships and building the, how they function, and it's great, except the first version ended up being just way too explainy, and that's like, people don't explain things as they're going through their,
the first version of The Dark Nothing.
Yeah, the first version. It just ended up being super surface. There was just a whole lot of focus on the surface of things and not what was actually, an actual story. It was just kind of like, here's this and here's that, and this is, we're going to do this to that. So, I ended up not using any of that original version, except for, some of the ship designs that I did, and the spacesuit design, I think, made it through. To talk about the spacesuit design real quick. Mm-hmm. After kind of figuring out what their spacesuit was going to look like and doing all this kind of, geez, why don't they make it like this? And, obviously this should be like that. After doing all of it and kind of figuring it out and being like, I've made the best spacesuit. Like, not in terms of like how it looks, but just how it functions. Then I like rewatched 2001, mm-hmm. and holy shit, like he had it all figured out. It was already figured out in 1969. It was incredible to watch. Like, it was cool because I had been so long since I'd seen it. I watch it and I'm like, man, this spacesuit. Like, we still don't have the spacesuit that they're using in 2001, but if you look at it, it really corresponds closely to like the latest developments in spacesuit technology. Like the skin tight suit that like is pulled towards you by like a mesh that tightens up, so there's no oxygen. So if you lose pressure, it just seals off. Like all these different things that, these fitted suits and these bigger helmets, it's all figured out in 1969. It was ridiculous that I went through all the all the work to like make a better spacesuit. But it's it's cool. It's cool to like have arrived independently at the same conclusions as Stanley Kubrick. I was like, all right, good job. You're on the right path.
Good company.
But yeah, just to see how it was cool after putting my brain there for so long to see how well done it was in 2001. Mm-hmm. That was cool. But I guess I had last seen 2001 when I was like 8 or something, like super young. Like I didn't even, so I'm wondering how much of it I had sort of stored away and was like drawing on. I don't know. It was remarkable though to see how well done those spacesuits were. And it was also cool because the spacesuits in 2001 look a lot like the X-Wing suits in Star Wars. They both have that sort of thing on the front of them. They both have the kind of striped padding. It seems like there was a direct swipe going on there too. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, yet another thing that I find different about issue number 5 is this installment of Keeping 2. It's longer than I think the previous 2, but I think even more importantly, it's more sophisticated in terms of the storytelling. And one of the reasons why I mention that is I had to do, metaphorically speaking, a double or triple take when I got to the point where the protagonist is opening a book and then you transition into his narrative. Because when I first read it, and I turned the page, I thought, okay. Well, actually, it's on the same page when this transition takes place. And I thought that maybe because you deal with time so well in keeping two, going back and forth, and you give little clues, right? So anytime that we're in the present, we have a solid bordered panel.
Right.
Anytime that there's a reference to the past or a fantasy of some sort, then we have either fuzzy panels or a borderless panel. And
specifically, it's the way I'm thinking about it is, if it was written word, the borderless panel would essentially be, and he thought.
Right.
It's basically anything that takes place in the mind is borderless.
Yeah. But then when we went to the transition from the story of and what is the protagonist's name?
His name is William.
William, okay, because I couldn't think of it. So when we go from William's story into the book that he's reading, the narrative of the book that he picked up, I didn't catch that was the story in the book at first, and so I thought, oh, have we flashed back to a time when he was younger and looks significantly different? And I'm trying to find
a little bit overweight.
Yeah. But there's also similarities between the stories that William's reading and the dilemma, as he sees it, that he's going through in waiting for his girlfriend, in that, there seems to be this sense of foreboding, of loss. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is part of it as well. And I was trying to put those two pieces together, and it didn't go together as well until I went back and looked again and a third time and realized, oh, he's opening a book. And then I think I realized that when I went online to your website and saw the most recent installments. That's when it dawned on me. Because when we get back to the straight bordered panel, we see William with the book. And I thought, oh, that's the story that he's reading. And I found that fascinating. But I like the way that not only you deal with time going back and forth in this series, keeping two, but also how you go from one narrative level to the other. And it tricked me.
Yeah, well, when with keeping two, that was, I've been trying to figure out how to draw. So in print books, in text, what do you call them? Just like books with words. There's this great freedom of being able to tell you what's on the character's mind by just saying what they're thinking about, or saying, just mentioning a thought that they're having, which I, wanted to find a good way of doing that, because that seems to add such a richness to a book, or just to go off on a story. Oftentimes there'll be a transition, and you'll have a like a 20-page story in the middle of a scene, and to be able to do that in comics was something that I was like, well, geez, I'd like to add that kind of richness without using narration, but by using the same language that I'm using to tell the rest of the story, and that's kind of where that came from. When I kind of put it like that, it doesn't seem very. It seems like my solution is pretty simple, not very sophisticated. And, I'd say it isn't. It doesn't seem very sophisticated at all. I essentially, end up being like, if he's, if there's a thought, it doesn't have a panel border around it, and it sort of just starts up there. And to be able to add those layers of thought, and what is affecting his subjective reality felt like this great direction to go for me. I was able to put in everything that was happening rather than just what was happening on the physical level. So that's kind of where that all came from. And And it for me, it really, as far as writing, it was really sort of, it felt like I was creating a lot of freedom for myself too, to just really explore every aspect of the story, And so I really do enjoy sort of writing in that way, with the thoughts and the actions being parallel.
You described it as being really simple. I don't see it so much that. I think that it's sophisticated in that you're using the language of images. You're using a visual language to do things that we normally are cued into when it comes to pro fiction. And now there are different ways that people do this in comics. You could have, let's say, the voiceovers,
Right.
some kind of narrator or even someone's internal thoughts in a box at the top of the panel or maybe at the bottom, depending, stating what's going on or what they were thinking about. In other words, something to give us readers a sense of where things are going in terms of time and perspective. I think of that as relatively simple and maybe too easy. A more challenging way is to get that across through images and not text, which is what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, the reason for that, I mean, the thing I feel about writing is, as much as I read a lot, like I read a ton, right? I read a lot, and I really like the written word, but I feel like the written word is, unless it's, really well done, there's this thing in writing where if you talk directly about something, it tends to diminish it. It tends to make it less impressive. It makes it less emotionally felt. It makes it less of a real thing the more you kind of talk it out. And so, an example would be to say, he was sad, right? As a reader, you just like, whatever, okay, I get it. He is sad. It doesn't mean anything to you as a reader. And the thing I feel about stories is that it's not the subject or the objective that you're trying to put across. I feel like a story is meant to wrap the person who is engaging with that story, is meant to like wrap them in the world of that story, fully subjectively. And so to use words to talk directly about a subjective state, for me, kills it. It kills that state. And so being able to use pictures to show what is creating that subjective state, and then let the reader kind of take it beyond to, actually feel it, to me is more effective than saying directly what's on their mind. And to me, effective in terms of storytelling and creating that sort of subjective state within the person who is reading the story. So yeah, that's where it kind of came from, is to use, like I said, use the same language as the rest of the story to talk about, the thoughts and the different things that are going on, the worries, the concerns, and just talk about them as directly and linearly as the, real, quote unquote, the actual action. The worries, when you think of something, it's real. And so treating that thought as real as everything else seemed like the kind of natural place to go with that.
A little while ago, you mentioned 2001: A Space Odyssey, and we're talking about storytelling that doesn't rely like a crutch on text. Do you find that you tend to take cues from visual storytelling, like film and television, and when you create your comics?
I don't, but I feel like that is to my discredit. I mean, when I do watch movies, I definitely am paying a lot of attention and going, wow, that's amazing how they did that. I don't, but it's something that, that at least not consciously, I don't consciously use those sort of things. I will say, like, that end, I mean, as long as to talk about 2001 again, that end sequence where they're in the kind of Victorian room, where you got the space capsule in the Victorian room, and we're kind of going through the stages of the guy's life. Mm-hmm. The way he transitions from one stage of life to the next, like the person looking and seeing, and then, nothing's looking back at them, and it transitions, is amazing. And it's straight comics. Like 2001 is straight comics. Like there's all these like static scenes, and it would read as a comic perfectly. And I really, that's something that I definitely notice about certain movies, that when they do these, when there's a movie where it doesn't rely a whole lot on pans and tracks and zooms, and it's just this static frame that is kind of one statement per frame, I find very interesting and very engaging on a comics level. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how much I end up taking away from that, other than, while I'm watching it, I'm fully engaged, and I'm sure that like sort of writes some neural pathways that I end up coming back to, when I'm at the table writing as well. But I don't know, some cartoonists like draw with movies playing. I know a lot of them, actually. I know Sammy Harcum, he actually, often seems to have a movie going on when he's drawing. And I totally can't do that. I just don't have the attention to, I just get distracted.
Now,
can't just leave it.
That reminds me of another story in this latest issue, and that is Wake Up, because you were saying a moment ago that it's a challenge to represent the inner state, the subjective state of what your characters are going through, and to do so visually. It seems to me that is what Wake Up is all about.
Yeah, definitely. That story was definitely, it was a nightmare. Total nightmare. And I guess that interesting. I mean, it's interesting that, yeah, like I feel like those three stories, the Wake Up, the Dark Nothing, and Middle Nowhere, they all have this kind of they talk about things that they don't directly talk about. I guess that's what it is. There's what's happening, and then there's sort of like this bigger thing overarching what's happening that I never really felt like I needed to say explicitly, because it didn't particularly inform the story. So, because the story could happen without it being said, I guess is what I'm saying. I guess it's just like working with, archetypes and metaphors and whatever, this sort of thing where you're able to say something without being overt about it, I suppose. Transference of a particular subjective state rather than talking about an objective like thing. I keep coming back to that, but I'm working with those stories. I was going outside of the bounds of the literal, I guess, is a good way of putting it. And that felt really good. That felt like a right place to start going, because I've wanted my work. I do like a lot of, I'm a fan of certain magical realist storytellers, like, Italo Calvino, mm-hmm. I think is great. I really enjoy his stories. It's something that really, magical realism is definitely something that it's not. It can be a little bit rough and not great, but when it's done right, I find it spectacular. Because it's able to just take things and apply this other logic to them, but still capture an essence. And I feel like, you're able to do things with unreal characters or unreal situations, that better describe or better relate a real situation, at least the subjective experience of that real situation, than if you were to just talk about the real situation. And it's more interesting,
Right.
to me.
I'll tell you, when I read Wake Up, what it reminded me of. It reminded, and part of this is not only the subjective part of Wake Up, but also your style, which I think is very different from the style in a lot of your other comics. It reminded me of Izzy Rubin's in Love and Rockets, specifically Flies on the Ceiling. It had that kind of dark, especially the heavy blacks. And because it does seem like a nightmare, I mean, both of those stories are nightmares or nightmare-ish, very fantastical, very magical in a sense. You were talking about magic realism. And I thought, wow, I mean, had I seen this in an issue of Love and Rockets, I would have thought, wow, Jaime's getting back to what he did with Flies on the Ceiling.
Nice, thank you. That's a great compliment. Yeah, well, I know I can completely see what you're saying. I mean, I do like I like the dream logic. I like the sort of the working with archetypes and strangeness and things that don't necessarily make sense on a real world basis, but totally make sense within a story. I mean, that's one of the great things about stories is you can just, you can do things. It's very, it's not bound by anything. And so yeah, I like the dream logic. And as far as the heavy blacks go, that's something that I keep pushing myself to, I really like the way heavy blacks look when I see other people's work. I'm a really big fan of just large blocks of black. It seems to lend a gravity to the page that wouldn't otherwise be there. And for some reason I just, with Keeping Two, it's just something I don't have. I have done, I guess, in the later stuff, but I tended to be more like, just clear line, just drawing what's there and not a whole lot of shadows. But it's been something I've been edging towards over, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years, is just laying down more and more and more black, and just obscuring as much as possible. And I've found it to be really, that's one of my favorite parts about drawing, is adding in the black now. It's like, I've done the drawing. Now how much of it can I cover up with black? And it ends up being it's because if you look at my blacks closely, they're so not literal. There is a passing nod to actual lighting, but it ends up being more like about directing the eye and directing the focus of the panel, which I just figured out, but apparently that's how lighting works. You use it to direct the eye. So, but I was able to figure that out, and it's great. I love putting down black on a page. It's just amazing.
Because my first introduction to your work was your 2001 book, Cold E.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's totally that. The only black things in that are the kid's hair.
Right. Now, if I would give, someone uninformed of your work, if I give them a copy of Cold E and then shown them the story Wake Up in this latest issue of Uptight, they probably wouldn't know that it's the same artist.
That's funny. I totally see what you're saying. I've always felt I feel like I don't have a particular way of drawing, like I don't, like, I mean, I obviously I do, but it always feels like every time I start drawing something, it feels kind of new, and so I feel in certain ways that I do kind of, I'm still kind of figuring out how I draw. And I don't, and maybe it's not me figuring it out. Maybe it's just me trying different things that I haven't done before and seeing, what works, what's the most expressive. But yeah, like, I mean, in Dark Nothing, I was like, those are, and Middle Nowhere. They both have eyes and noses, which I love. Wow! Turns out I love drawing eyes and noses. But for Keeping Two, I feel like it works better when they don't have eyes and noses because the story is so. It's an incredibly emotional story, and I feel to put that level of emotional expression on the character's face is leaning too much towards objectivity. When they just have dots for eyes and nose, it becomes a lot more subjective, I feel. Like, which is to say, like, as a reader, you're not put off by looking at this person making a sad face. You more feel that person's emotional state because of what has preceded it in the story. And so it's it's inferred. And I feel like that works better in that way. Whereas, I think Dark Nothing is a different type of story, and so I feel like it works better with eyes and noses. And tonally too. Like I know that a lot of my work tends to be kind of grim, but I also do feel like I'm all over the place as far as that goes too. Because I just got all these stories. I think of a story and I'm like, I want to tell this story. I want to tell it, and it needs to be this way. And or some, like, I'm working on some things right now that aren't even stories. They're more like explanations. Like I'm working on a book right now that's an explanation of time, and it's not even a story, but it has to have some story elements, and there's this and that. But like, it's just trying to get this thing out of my head and make a thing out of it that other people can see. And it usually ends up going through a couple different channels that I guess, I don't know, like it just ends up not looking like the previous thing. I don't know exactly. It feels weird for me because I don't have a particular style, but it's okay.
Well, I think you had another example of a different Jordan Crane style, although it's iconic as well, or more on the iconic side, is your series of stories that feature Simon and Jack. And for those who may not be initiated to this world, Simon is a little boy and Jack is his pet cat, and Jack talks. And responds to and reacts to Simon and everything else going on. And, as I mentioned earlier, these stories are kind of fantastical, to say the least. And we got a couple of them in issues 3 and 4 of Uptight, but you have you come to prominence in their world with your book from, what was it, 2005, The Clouds Above.
2005, yep.
Yeah,
Clouds Above.
And so I want you to talk a bit about these two characters and how you see them as part of your larger body of work, if you'll continue coming back to them. What kind of audience you write?
Yeah, well, I do. I really, so Clouds Above is something that it's kind of like the world that I go to in response to, like, when I was a kid, I read a ton of fantasy books. Like, the first real, like, I read for a while, but the first, like, collection of books that really launched me in any heavy reading direction was the Wizard of Oz series, like the Oz books. Like, my parents actually just bought me all 14 of them by Frank L. Baum, and I read all of them, and they were amazing, and I loved them so much, and I just thought they were spectacular in just how weird and strange and fantastical they were. And so that was, something that that was a very formative experience. And then I went on to read the other all the other classic books involving strange worlds, and that had always been something that I wanted to There's always been a place where I wanted to go. You know, the world that exists parallel to our world, or the worlds that exist parallel to our world that affect it in certain ways that most people just don't know about. But there's this kid and his cat that are able to get there and see it, and that, you know, that's kind of where that came from. He ended up being a boy because, and this is, I mean, I guess Harry Potter's the notable exception, but like practically all of the stories that I read take place from the point of view of a girl. You know, like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Wizard of Oz. I'm not thinking of the other ones that I had this fairly lengthy list, but
Alice in Wonderland.
Well, yeah, obviously that one too. Yeah, for sure, that would have been it. Yeah, thank you. And I thought, well, let's, I'll do it from my, I'll see it from how I was as a kid, like, and I'll just have him be a boy, and there was also this time in Portugal when I saw this little kid with white hair, and it looked exactly like Simon. I was like, that's awesome. I want to use that kid somewhere. And so that kind of, I was like, okay, so let's do it from the point of view of a boy. In the last story, I introduced the character Rosalind because I wanted there to be three of them, and it made more sense for there to be three of them because I could do more things narratively, and I wanted there to be a girl. But it started out as just being a boy and his cat. I just have gone through my life thinking of all sorts of weird, I dislike that word, thinking of like explanations of things that aren't as they are, and liking that kind of branch of pseudoscience very much, just like explaining the physical, natural world in ways that are completely different, sort of a Rube Goldberg explanation of things. Mm-hmm. And I wanted a place for that. I wanted a place where I could put these ideas that I had for different things. And that's kind of where Simon and Jack came out of. And also just, wouldn't it be great if there was a stairway that went to the clouds that you could hang out on, and you could go there. All these different, it's funny. When I say that, it sounds like pretty obvious. Like, obviously you would want to go on a staircase and hang out on the clouds. It's like one of those things when I'm flying in an airplane, I look out and I'm like, geez, I'd like to walk across that. That would be so amazing. So with that, I can do that, and that's fun. It's like I get to go there.
Yeah. Now, the clouds above especially strikes me as a narrative that could be specifically a children's book. In other words, it could be, if it were a different dimension, different format, it would make sense finding it in the picture book section of the bookstore or the library. And I'm wondering if you think of the Simon and Jack stories as, if not children's stories, something akin to kid stories, or could easily be turned into children's stories.
Absolutely. I definitely think of them as kid stories. When I wrote them, I tried to have the dialogue be secondary to the action, so the action would mostly just explain everything, and the dialogue was more there as kind of like sprinkles, like those rainbow sprinkles you put on the top of ice cream. The dialogue was not affecting or directing the action, so it could be understood if the child couldn't yet read. Also, the size of it, I wanted it to be that size, and I wanted it to be hardcover so that it could just be abused and carried around by a little child.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I very, very much think of them as kid stories, and try to work in that world as well. where there's not a whole lot of really horrible things happening to characters in the end, and how there's no. I want to show that even the sort of mean characters or the awful characters have something good about them in most cases. I mean, sometimes I'll use characters that don't end up redeeming themselves, but having, being able to see two sides of what initially appears to be something frightening or awful. You just, yeah, I mean, the way they talk to each other is, it might be a little rough, but it's ultimately, it's sweet, and it's they very dearly love each other. And so it's a place for a lot of different things that I sort of want in, like, my ideal children's story.
Yeah, and even the evil potential in your story, Dark Day, which follows up from Freeze Out, and Dark Day is in issue number 4 of Uptight. Yeah. The monster, we really don't see the monster completely, so it's almost as if it's not really there. But even more pernicious is Pernicious Codswallop, who is the principal of Rosalind and Simon's school, and I mean he's meaner than the monster. But even he comes across visually, as well as through his behavior, as a cartoon character. So he may not have the best of intentions and do things that really suck for the kids, but
I think he does. I think that's probably a good example. I mean, I will say that, like, I definitely am one of the, I am one of the cartoonists who will represent school as a ultimately terrible and awful place that is crushing in most ways.
So you and Woody Allen,
and Bill Watterson, and Mad Magazine, and the list is as long as my arm. Which I have to say, I didn't go into it feeling like that. Like, I went into it, like, with Simon and Jack, feeling like, yeah, school's a good place. That was when my kids were young. Now that my kids are actually in school, I'm reminded of, it's awful. Yeah. School sucks. It's so fucking terrible. Not that I think learning is bad, but I feel like the way it's done in school is by and large just terrible. It's just this awful conformity factory of just, it's not learning. It's just, whatever. It's tough. It's hard, so, I think that also in future stories ends up being, something I can talk about as well. Just how, ways that Simon and Jack and Rosalind will have of kind of escaping the claws of being smashed down in school.
Having their souls crushed.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I have this very, my view of how schools should be and the reality of schools are so far apart. I mean, I definitely idealize school. I had some really great experiences in a couple classes in school. But by and large, it's just teachers that don't want to understand the people in their classes because it's hard work. I'm sure it's a long day when, you have 30 people every hour and you have to be a good teacher. You basically have to empathize with 30 people every hour and sort of be on their same wavelength. And, that's tough. That's an intense thing. And I think a lot of teachers don't even go into it thinking that they have to essentially empathize. Like, you can't teach anybody unless you're on the same sort of wavelength as they are, and if you just go into it like with a hammer being like, here's the lesson, everybody learn this, then it's going nowhere. And that seems to be the general approach to education. And that really is a bummer to me. But it's something to talk about, in at least tangentially in Simon and Jack as well. I don't know. I don't talk about it at all in clouds above other than to have them completely not be in class.
So you will create more Simon and Jack stories and Rosalind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's definitely a world that I super love being in. I've got a ton more stories for them. It's just a matter of me only having two hands. It's cool. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like, I remember when I was a younger cartoonist, I would hear people talk about all these stories that they had to do still, and it just terrified me because when I first started working, I would have like one story that I was working on. I was like, this is the best I can do. This is like the sum total of everything I've ever thought of. Like, I don't know what else I would write about. And then when a story was done, I would just be in a cold sweat. Like, what the fuck am I going to write about next? And so it's really like, I finally have found myself on the other side of that fence now where I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, it's not a matter of what I'm going to do next. It's like, what am I going to like put aside so I can do what I'm going to do next? So that's nice. And that's kind of where Simon and Jack are right now. You know, I've got all these things written out for them, but it's a matter of doing it.
Taking the time to play out their adventures.
Focusing on that, yeah. You know, and I've got all these, I'm working, you know, I'm in the middle of, I have to finish Keeping 2 because, by the way, when did I start Keeping 2? I think it was 2001. And I started it in 2001, and by 2005, I hadn't finished it, and I was like, that's cool. Charles Burns is still working on Black Hole. And then a couple of years later, Black Hole came out, and he was done with Black Hole. I was like, he's been working on Black Hole for like 10 years. It's going to be fine. So then Black Hole came out, and that was my sort of benchmark. I was like, nah, he's working on Black Hole. It's fine that I'm taking long to do this. Black Hole comes out. Oh, that's cool. I guess I better get started finishing Keeping 2. Then X'd Out comes out. Then he finishes the whole X'd Out series. So now he's done 2 complete, like, projects, and I'm still not done with Keeping 2. So I'm like, it's time to, this is the year.
Does Charles Burns realize that you're using him as a barometer?
Yeah, he knows. He said it was a terrible idea.
Yeah. You know, now a book that I'm not familiar with, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is also a story for, I guess, for younger readers, and this is Keep Our Secrets. This came out in 2012 from McSweeney's.
Yeah, that's a story about. So that book was the sort of kernel of the idea for that book came from this cover I did for McSweeney's issue 35. And this cover had this black ink that was printed on top of the drawing I did for the cover. And the black ink was printed in these certain areas, like, you know, the street was covered with the black ink. And this black ink was temperature sensitive. So if you put your hand on the black ink and kind of rub it, you would, like, the street would disappear and it was this river with all these fish in it. And so it was like, oh, strange, neat. And they liked that and wanted to do a book with this black ink in it. And so it's a similar concept. It's basically these kids are they're walking through this adult party where these adults are all just kind of having a party. And they, you know, they're just pointing out all the different weird stuff that's happening. And then you rub the black ink and you can see, you know, like this guy's carrying a bucket full of piranhas. There's a giant dog inside the piano, you know, and it just keeps going and going and all these things. And then they get outside and they see some other things, and the book wraps up that way as they've sort of explored everything and seen what there is to see. I really liked doing it. It was really fun to do. The ink ended up, however, not being as pressure or as temperature sensitive as we were hoping it would be. So if it was summertime and you know the temperature was around 70 or 80, you could rub the ink fairly effectively, and you would rub it and it would turn transparent. And you could see what's underneath it. But if it was the slightest bit chilly, like you couldn't rub that. You could not rub the ink until you could see through it. And so they ended up publishing the book with a little sticker on it that says, best read with a hairdryer. Which, I don't know. It's a hairdryer is a tough thing to bring into the mix when you're reading a bedtime story. So I think that was kind of Achilles' heel there with the book. It kind of ended up falling on its face publicly, but that's okay. I really do want to reprint the book with, I think it would be great to do it with those those overlays, like the acetate overlays, like that are in the dictionary or in the encyclopedia.
Oh yeah,
from when like the you can go down through the human and see all the different parts. I think it would be great to reprint the book with those, so you could just turn it back and see what's underneath. That would be cool. But the temperature sensitive ink, that was a bomb. Didn't work. But it's still a cool book. It was really fun to do.
Well, what are you working on right now? You were talking about a lot of things a lot of ideas that you have and things that you could be working on if you had more time. What are you currently working on?
I am currently working on the end of Keeping Two. I have written. I'm in the process of finishing the ending. I've written it. I've written it out about halfway through, and I'm tying things up. I'm having to go back and put a few things in at the beginning, or in the middle. Just kind of going through and finding my way to the end is where I'm at. I've got about 25 pages ruled out that are, and half of them are penciled, and I've just got them on the rack, and I've, been working my way through those, and I'm focusing all of my efforts as best I can on Keeping Two. I usually work on something else first thing in the morning. So that's kind of like my catch-all for like, if I really have a wild hair up my ass and I need to work on something, I do that, and so I do it for like 15 or 20 minutes in the morning and make like little progress on, these other stories that I'm working on. But I use discipline, which is new to me, sort of, and put that aside and then, get back into the Keeping Two world and work on that. And the objective is to finish it, by the end of this year. Finish drawing it by the end of this year. I still have to edit it, but I want to finish it so I can like put it in a drawer and then not look at it for a couple of months and then go back and read it with fresh eyes and make the edits that need to be made, and then it's done. So, the first thing that's required is getting it finished as a story.
Right.
So, and that's going to be great. I'm looking at it's probably like a 260-page book, something like that.
So you will publish this as a standalone?
Yes, it will be published as a standalone. Before I publish as a standalone, I will publish the ending as a mini comic for sure. I want the complete first run, or the first sort of iteration of the story as mini comics, because I really like that. That's sort of my first love in the comics world.
And you're publishing installments on this on your website of Keeping Two?
Yeah, I'm publishing. I haven't been updating What Things Do as much more recently because I've just been so incredibly busy, and that website takes a lot of effort, and a lot of time to kind of keep it running. So I haven't put comics up there lately. Like I need to put the entirety of Uptight 5 up there, except for Keeping Two. None of the other stories. I don't even think Wake Up is on What Things Do. Mm-hmm. So that's something I need to get to. It's just a matter of how I spend my time, and right now I'm feeling like the best way I can spend my time is drawing instead of updating the website. But yeah, the Keeping Two is up there, and it does go past the place where I published it in Uptight 5. So there's the whole, and that I guess is what's going to be in, part of that's going to be in Uptight 6. And yeah, it's getting really exciting. The other nice part about working on Keeping 2 is that I've kind of laid down all these tracks, and now I'm getting to follow them out. And that's always, I'm at the best part of writing right now.
Good. Yeah. Well, you have enough to do. I mean, do you have any interests in going back to editing like you did with your non-anthology years ago?
I don't. And that's kind of why I started What Things Do. The thing I really like about anthologies is being able to work with other artists and kind of show work that I really like, whether it be from an established artist or, from somebody who isn't doesn't have as much publicity or, is just starting out. I really loved being able to work with other artists. But right now I just don't have the time. Like I think like my own work has ended up filling up so much of my time that, I've been negligent with what things do. I haven't been able to give it the attention it needs to be a really thorough anthology and, updated and having the dead links fixed and all this sort of thing. It's a ton of work. I don't like anthologies. I don't think I'm going back to anthologies. That's kind of why I left off where I did with number 5 was that I just wanted to focus my efforts on developing my own work, instead of focusing them on publishing. That was kind of the biggest one. Like it took that was a really rough issue to publish. I made every single one of those books by hand. And, by the time I got to the end of 2,000 books, excuse me, by the time I got to the end of 2,000 books, I was like, Jesus, I've just spent the last year basically making books. And I really want to be a cartoonist. I don't want to be a publisher. And I like publishing. I love publishing. I love books. Just like the paper book to me is one of my favorite things. And so I really love publishing, but, I was like, I got to make a choice here because, I can't do everything. I just literally can't. And so it was a conscious decision to just be like, all right, I want to be a cartoonist. Really want to be a cartoonist. And so that was kind of where I stopped publishing the anthology. But I came back to it with What Things Do, but I'm still having to go through that same choice. I thought it would be super easy. I'd be like, it's we'll just pop it up there on the internet, no problem. But still, it was hard.
Yeah.
Still, it took a lot of work. And yeah, I just find, I'm accumulating more and more things that I want to do that kind of only I can do by sitting down and drawing them, that's where I'm wanting to put my effort and my time.
Well, you got a lot going on, which makes me even more appreciative of you taking the time and talking with me for the Comics Alternative. So Jordan, it's been great talking with you. Good luck in finishing up Keeping 2 and the other projects that you have going on.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It was great talking to you.
And there you have it, my conversation with Jordan Crane. I want to thank Jordan once again for taking the time and being on the Comics Alternative podcast. It was great having him on. And if you want to find great discounts on great comics, such as those that Jordan creates, then you would do well to visit the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. Be sure to go to dcbservice.com, and I guarantee you every single month you're going to find some unbelievable specials. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with me and let me know what you're going to be reading and, more importantly, what you thought about my conversation with Jordan Crane. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message through SpeakPipe. It's really simple and easy to use. Or you can call us on the phone. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs, but we're all over the social media sphere, such as Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. You can also get us on Spotify now, and if you're an Android user, Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as the mini reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's by going to the website, comicsalternative.com. We got many more interviews lined up over the next month, so check back with us for those. And until then, take care.